coverage and analysis of Russia are overly fixated on Putin's personality. Time and again, the characteristics of the man are used to explain the behavior or interests of the state. The conflation is to some extent understandable. Russia is a country in which political power is not only highly concentrated, but deeply personalized, so the preferences and whims of the figure at the very heart of the system take on an outsized importance. But even in an age when it has become common to analyze complex events through the prism of singular personalities, the recurrent focus on Putin has become particularly extreme, and it is unhelpfully self-confirming. The more media coverage and analysis uses him to explain Russia, the more Putin comes to dominate, constantly narrowing our frame of reference. Too much attention has been paid to the man, and not enough to the system over which he presides. The obsession with Putin's persona effectively reduces a whole range of political, economic, and social questions to the swings of one individual's mood or morality. At best, this is highly misleading, distracting us from the broader structural forces that have done so much to shape Russia's fortunes in the last few decades. At worst, the focus on Putin is dangerously counterproductive, leading to profoundly mistaken ideas about the source of Russia's ills. The notion that a single person is responsible for everything that happens in Russia shades all too readily into the belief that changing the figure at the top will rectify the problem. Putin did not create the system, nor will his removal from the scene alter its fundamental character. In order to understand Russia today, the West needs to shake off its obsession with Putin and look at what lies beyond the Kremlin walls. It needs, in other words, to learn to see Russia without Putin. At a time when Russia has moved to the center of public debate in much of the West, it is especially important to have a more informed idea of what the country is actually like. At the height of the Cold War, Western views of the USSR often came packaged in pat formulas about tyranny and freedom, totalitarianism versus democracy. But at least there was a sizable body of writers, scholars, activists, and thinkers who could supply a more nuanced perspective based on first-hand experience. The West's levels of expertise and awareness about Russia have, sadly, declined steeply since then, opening the way for all kinds of ill-informed speculation, often churned out by individuals with no knowledge of the place, let alone of the people or the language, to circulate unchallenged. As a result, public opinion and policy decisions are based on a very shallow understanding of the country. The purpose of this book is to provide a portrait of contemporary Russia that goes beyond the blaring headlines about its president. How is Russia ruled, and for whose benefit? What are the consequences for Russian society? How can we best explain Russia's mounting clashes with the West? Where is the country headed? To answer these questions, we need to discard several of the core assumptions behind most discussions of Putin's Russia. First, there is the widespread notion that Putin has overseen a nostalgic return to Soviet times, reversing the market reforms and democratization carried out by Yeltsin in the 1990s. Second, the idea that Putin and a small clique around him control and decide everything in Russia, constituting a kleptocracy or mafia state. Third, the belief, shared by many Russians too, that the country's problems can in large part be put down to the lingering legacies of the Soviet past, with the logical follow-on that as and when these legacies are shed, Russia will be able to join the ranks of normal capitalist countries. A fourth key trope of Western analysis is to blame the relative weakness of the opposition on a combination of Soviet holdovers and Putin's authoritarianism. In other words, on apathy from below and repression from above. Finally, in the realm of foreign policy, there is the conviction that Russia under Putin has become an aggressor state, bent on a return to Cold War-style confrontation with the West, or even on the destruction of Western democracy itself. The chapters that follow overturn each of these assumptions. Far from destroying the legacies of Yeltsin's neoliberal restructuring, Putin in many crucial ways preserved and extended them. There are, to be sure, differences between the style and temperament of the two leaders, but there has been no fundamental change in the character of the system itself. Indeed, the 1990s and 2000s should be seen as two phases in the evolution of the same system. First, a turbulent period in which the Soviet order was destroyed and a new capitalist model